Before we get into today's video, we want to bring you a word from our amazing sponsor, Ridge Wallets. Do you use one of those old bulky leather wallets? When I used one, I used to cram junk into it like receipts and coupons. But then I never end up using any of that stuff. I'd fill it to the point where I couldn't sit on my wallet comfortably. But now, I use a carbon fiber wallet from the Ridge. It's sleek and fits comfortably into any pocket. Because of its awesome design, I don't carry any more junk. Besides carbon fiber, the Ridge has other cool designs, so you're bound to find a unique wallet that matches your personality. And the Ridge sells more than just wallets. I love their weatherproof backpack, and I take it everywhere with me. I can even use it to charge my devices. Right now, the Ridge is offering criminally listed viewers 10% off with free worldwide shipping and returns. Just go to ridge.com/listed, that's ridge.com/listed, and use the promo code LISTED. Buy yourself or someone special the best wallet they'll ever own by going to theridge.com/listed. Number 3. Arlene Hoffman. As 1994 was coming to an end, Arlene Hoffman was 57 years old. She was living in a townhouse in Laguna Niguel, California. Everyone who knew Arlene said she was a dynamic woman. One of Arlene's friends told a reporter who was writing a profile on her that only someone like Mark Twain could capture Arlene's essence in words. Clearly, we're not in the same league as Mark Twain, but this is what is known about Arlene Hoffman. Arlene was born and raised in New Jersey. Shortly after high school, she married a man named Joel. After getting married, they relocated to California. When Arlene was 24, she got a job as a secretary at Norton Simon Incorporated. Norton Simon was an American industrialist who started Velveeta Foods, which later became Hunt's. At the time, Simon was one of the richest men in America. Arlene was eventually promoted to the position of executive secretary for the president of the company. The president moved to New York, and he asked Arlene to relocate and continue to be his secretary. But Arlene declined the offer. Instead, she became the personal secretary to Norton Simon. While Arlene worked for one of the richest men in America, she and Joel had financial problems. When Arlene was 26, they filed for bankruptcy. It's believed that the money problems stemmed from setbacks Joel had at his butcher shop. In 1970, Arlene got a job as a secretary to an attorney who was running for Congress. He ultimately wasn't elected. In 1973, Arlene worked on a campaign for a former Speaker of the California State Assembly who was running for mayor of Los Angeles. The former Speaker did not win the election. In 1972, Arlene started working at a political consulting firm run by a man named Fred Harbour. She worked there for just over 2 years. Then in June 1975, Harbour went missing while boating off the coast of Baja California. His body has never been found. In 1975, Arlene's husband, Joel, was appointed to the position of probate referee. Probate referees appraise estate assets. It's believed that one of Arlene's political connections got him the job. Arlene also worked for a hospital run by Dr. Louis Sella. Sella was known for his powerful political connections, and he was referred to as a kingmaker. At one time, he was the largest contributor to political campaigns in California. Sella was accused of making out fake patients and then billing California's Medicaid program as if he had treated them. He then funneled that money into political campaigns. In 1976, Arlene testified in front of the grand jury regarding the embezzlement. Sella ended up being convicted of tax evasion, embezzlement, and conspiracy, and he served 31 months in a federal prison. After working at the hospital, Arlene continued to work as Joel's assistant and his office manager until 1991. Besides being a probate referee, Joel also worked as a consultant. Then, in 1992, Joel found out he had 2 terminal illnesses and he was unable to work. Arlene struggled to pay the bills, and she had to file for bankruptcy again in October 1993. She kept the bankruptcy a secret from her dying husband. Joel passed away in March 1994. After Joel died, Arlene collected $510,000 in life insurance payouts. She then moved into the townhouse in Laguna Niguel, which was owned by her sister and her brother-in-law. Arlene had no biological children, but when she was in her 40s, she adopted a teenage boy. The mother was a friend of hers, and the boy apparently came from a rough background. In the autumn of 1994, months after her husband's death, Arlene was working on the campaign of Jim Silva, who was running for the Orange County Board of Supervisors. Silva won the election, and he hired Arlene to be his personal secretary. On December 29, 1994, Arlene went out shopping for some clothes for work. She then went home. At around 7 p.m., Arlene called her sister. The next morning, Arlene didn't show up for work. Everyone thought that this was odd because it was Jim Silva's first staff meeting and Arlene was looking forward to it. She planned on bringing donuts. At the end of the business day, no one had heard from Arlene, so her boss, Jim Silva, called the police and asked them to do a welfare check. Officers arrived at the townhouse and found the front door unlocked. They let themselves into Arlene's home. They found the 57-year-old dead in the foyer. She had been shot in the chest with a hunting arrow. The arrow either went through her body or was pulled out by the killer. The arrow was not found at the crime scene. It is believed that the arrow was shot from a bow, a spear gun, or a crossbow. The medical examiner thought that Arlene was killed sometime between 7:30 p.m., about half an hour after she called her sister, and 7:30 the next morning. Besides Arlene's dead body lying in the foyer, nothing else was out of place. The house had not been ransacked, and there were no signs of disarray. Also, nothing had been stolen. There were no signs of a break-in or forced entry. One interesting thing that the police noted was that the arrow entered Arlene's body on a downward angle. The police suspected that the killer was standing above her on her staircase when he or she fired the arrow. The police were at a loss as to who would have wanted to kill Arlene Hoffman. She had not been sexually assaulted, and nothing appeared to be stolen. The police considered the possibility that she was killed because of her work or political connections, but that line of investigation did not yield a suspect. Another possibility was that Arlene owed money to the wrong people. But since nothing was stolen, the police do not think that Arlene was murdered over money. The police suspected that since there was no forced entry or a break-in, Arlene knew her killer. The police also investigated her friends and family. Once again, they did not find any viable suspects. They were able to rule out Arlene's adopted son as the killer. He received most of her six-figure estate. He put up a $25,000 reward for information leading to an arrest. But no one came forward with a viable lead. Over 25 years later, the murder of 57-year-old Arlene Hoffman is considered cold. Number 2. Sylvia Leung. In the 1980s, Lawrence Leung worked for Hong Kong's immigration department. While he worked for the department, he secured Canadian citizenships for himself, his wife, Kitty, their son, Hugo, and their daughter, Sylvia. He did not go through the usual channels to get these citizenships. In 1989, Lawrence was promoted to Director of Immigration. That same year, the Leung family moved into an upscale apartment in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. Although his family lived in Canada, Lawrence still held his position as Director of Immigration in Hong Kong. In 1993, Lawrence's daughter, Sylvia, was 22 years old. She was attending the BC Institute of Technology, where she was studying financial management. The campus is in the city of Burnaby, which is in the Vancouver metropolitan area. At around 7:30 p.m. on January 24, 1993, Sylvia was found bleeding to death in one of the parking lots on campus. An arrow from a crossbow was lodged in her left shoulder. Sylvia was rushed to the hospital, but sadly, she was pronounced dead on arrival. The arrow had cut an artery in her shoulder and she bled to death. Before Sylvia's murder, her family was the victim of a series of arson attacks. Nearly 4 months earlier, on August 28, 1998, someone or several people broke into their home in Vancouver. They started a fire in the bedroom of Sylvia's brother, Hugo. They also started another fire in the basement rec room. An accelerant was used in the fire. No one was at home when the fires were started. In total, there was $115,000 in damage. After the fire, while construction was being done on the apartment, Hugo moved out and he lived with some friends. Just over 2 months later, on November 2nd, he was still living with some friends. On that night, his car was parked outside of their home. Someone set it on fire. Then, 2 nights later, a fire was started in the stairwell of the Leung's building. The fire caused $7,500 in damage. Once again, an accelerant was used. About 2.5 months later, Sylvia was killed. A detective was convinced that the fires and the murder were connected. One of the first people the police investigated was a former boyfriend of Sylvia's, but they found no evidence to connect him to the murder or the fires. 9 months after the murder, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police arrested a man in Calgary, Alberta. Calgary is about 600 miles from Vancouver. The man was arrested after he blackmailed families in Calgary. He was also seen around the city firing a crossbow, but the police were able to clear the man as a suspect. A detective who worked on the case thought that the arson attacks and the murder were committed by professionals. So the police investigated to see if the Triads, a Chinese-based transnational crime syndicate, was responsible for any of the crimes. But once again, no charges were laid regarding the murder of Sylvia Leung. There was also some speculation that Sylvia's murder had something to do with her father's position as the Director of Immigration for Hong Kong. Nearly 3.5 years after Sylvia's murder, her father, Lawrence, was forced to resign from his position. This was shocking because it was the lead up to the British handover of Hong Kong to the Chinese. The reason he was forced to resign was not made public at the time. Without an official explanation, it led to a lot of speculation about why Lawrence was forced out. The leading rumor was that Lawrence was setting up passports for Chinese dissidents, but he was also feeding the Chinese government information about the dissidents. In 2008, Lawrence Leung died at the age of 67 without seeing someone arrested for the murder of his daughter. In 2019, 18 files regarding Lawrence's time as Director of Immigration were made public. The files contain an explanation for why he was forced to resign. Lawrence had a close friend who was involved in organized crime in Hong Kong and overseas. The man was involved in money laundering in several countries. When Lawrence was questioned about the man, he was reluctant to talk about him, but he did admit that they were close friends. Lawrence was also investigated over a check he received in May 1993 for 750,000 Hong Kong dollars, which was equivalent to about 100,000 US dollars. A person who reviewed the financial transaction thought that the money came from a drug syndicate. Lawrence claimed that the check was the profit from a company in Singapore that he had invested in. There wasn't any further investigation into the check, but the fact that Lawrence was close friends with a man who was involved in money laundering and organized crime was enough to force him to resign. It is important to note that only 18 files regarding Lawrence's time as Director of Immigration were released. 7 other files have not been released because they have been labeled confidential. The content of those files will not be made public until 2047. As of right now, the murder of Sylvia Leung remains unsolved and is considered cold. If her father's actions, relationships, or his position as Director of Immigration had anything to do with her brutal murder, we may not know for another 27 years. Number 1. Patricia Parsons. Patricia Parsons lived in Frion Barnet, which is a suburb in the London, England borough of Barnet. In 1990, her house was worth £500,000. Accounting for inflation, that is £1.1 million or 1.5 million US dollars in 2020. This was just one of 3 homes she owned. Parsons' official job was a masseuse, but the real source of her income was her work as an escort. Supposedly, Parsons entertained prominent people, including judges, lawyers, and TV presenters. On the night of June 23, 1990, Parsons was supposed to meet her boyfriend of 2 years at his restaurant. That evening, he was hosting a party at the restaurant. Parsons had lent him money to open the restaurant, but Parsons never arrived at the restaurant. The next day, at around noon, Parsons' car was found parked beside a country road near Epping Forest. Epping Forest is an ancient woodland that is on the border of London and Essex. Inside the car was the dead body of 42-year-old Patricia Parsons. She had been shot 3 times in the head and the neck with arrows from a high-powered crossbow. The police talked to Parsons' neighbors, and several of them noticed odd things that happened on the day she was murdered. One neighbor was driving down the same country road where her car was found around 1:30 p.m. Near the spot where Parsons' car would be found nearly 24 hours later, she saw 2 cars parked on the opposite sides of the road. 2 men were loitering around the cars. At about 6:30 p.m., she was driving on the same road and she noticed that the men were still there. Around 5 p.m., Parsons was home and her car was parked in her driveway. One of her neighbors saw a nice black car pull into the driveway, but the driver didn't get out of the car. He just nodded at the house, then backed out of the driveway and drove off. At about 7:30 p.m., Parsons left her home and then came back at about 8 p.m. Her boyfriend called her shortly after she got home. Parsons told him that she had big news to share, but she did not want to tell him what it was over the phone. He asked her if the news was good or bad, and she said it was good news. Another one of Parsons' neighbors was home that night watching a World Cup game. At around 8:30, he heard a man shouting in Parsons' home. Minutes later, he heard Parsons' door slam shut. Then he saw Parsons and a man walk to Parsons' car. The man got into the driver's seat and Parsons got into the passenger seat. Then they drove off. Parsons' boyfriend called her at home at 9:15, but no one answered. The police had a team of 6 detectives work on the case, but it wasn't long before the case went cold. In 2003, the case was reviewed and DNA testing was done. However, it did not lead to an arrest. The police continued to investigate the murder. In February 2007, 17 years after Parsons was killed, the police arrested a 58-year-old man in connection with the murder. He was not arrested because of DNA evidence, but instead the police found the man using what they called traditional inquiry methods. They questioned the man for 5 hours, and he refused to answer their questions. He was ultimately released, and he was never charged again. No one else has been arrested in connection with Parsons' murder. The police thought that Patricia Parsons might have been killed to keep her quiet. There were rumors that she was going to talk about her clientele with a reporter from a newspaper. Parsons kept a diary that was either blue or black, and it contained her list of clients. The list contained 200 names, and some of them were supposedly very prominent people. After she was killed, the diary was nowhere to be found, and it has never been located. However, many people do not believe this is why she was killed. One reason is that Parsons was already wealthy. Also, her clients paid her well to be discreet, so she did not have much to gain by going public. Another theory is that Parsons was killed by a professional hitman with connections to organized crime. 6 months before she was killed, there was a double homicide that took place about 2 miles from where her body was found. 39-year-old Terry Gooderham was an accountant and auditor for several pubs. In December 1989, he was dating 2 women. One of them was 32-year-old Maxine Arnold. Arnold possibly knew that Gooderham was dating the other woman. On December 23, 1989, Gooderham and Arnold were found dead in his car. The car was parked near Ebbing Forest, about 2 miles from where Patricia Parsons was found dead in her car. Arnold and Gooderham had been shot in the back of the head with a shotgun. The police went to Arnold's apartment and found the lights on, and her purse was there. It is thought that the killer forced the couple to leave the apartment, where someone set up a meeting between them and the killer. Then the killer forced them to drive to the spot near Ebbing Forest where he or she shot them. It's also believed that Gooderham was the target and Arnold was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. There are several theories about why the couple was killed. One was that Gooderham was dating a third woman and she killed them or had them killed. However, the police never uncovered any evidence to back up this theory. Another possibility is that Gooderham discovered some fraud during his work as an accountant and auditor for pubs. This theory has a bit more substance. In December 2019, a now retired detective talked to the tabloid, The Mirror. He chose to remain anonymous. According to official Scotland Yard documents, in the days after the murder of the couple, there were 4 suspects, and they were all connected to organized crime syndicates. The detective said that no arrests were made because the suspects were protected by corrupt police officers. The detective claimed that he talked to an informant, and the informant told him that Gooderham had uncovered a scam. Gangsters were threatening pub owners and taking control of the pubs. The ringleader of the scam was an associate of twin brother gangsters Ronnie and Reggie Cray. In March 1969, the Cray brothers were convicted of murder and they were sentenced to life in prison. The associate, who was not identified, was not arrested with the brothers, and he continued to be involved in criminal activity. There is speculation that the gangster ordered a hitman named Jimmy Moody to kill Gooderham to silence him. Moody was an enforcer and hitman for several crime syndicates over 4 decades. In December 1980, Moody escaped from a prison in inner South London. He was awaiting trial for armed robbery. He remained on the lam until June 1st, 1993. That's when the 52-year-old hitman was shot to death in a pub in East London. Moody is supposedly the prime suspect in the murder of Terry Gooderham and Maxine Arnold. But did he have anything to do with the murder of Patricia Parsons? Some people believe so because of the similarities between the murder of the couple and Parsons' murder. They were all driven to an area outside of Ebbing Forest. Their bodies were found about 2 miles from each other. Their murders happened within 6 months of each other. They were all shot to death in their cars, albeit Gooderham and Arnold were killed with a shotgun and Parsons was killed with a crossbow. The police also said that the murders had the hallmarks of a professional hit. While there are a lot of theories, it's not known for sure if one killer was responsible for all 3 murders. It is also not known for sure who killed them, and their cases are considered cold. If you're looking for something new to watch, why not check out my new channel, Chapter Dark, which I started with the creator of Top 5 Unknowns. Every week we have a new mystery for you to solve. If you like escape rooms, puzzles, or riddles, then you'll hopefully like Chapter Dark. In our latest video, an attorney has been murdered after getting a big promotion. His killer is later found dead, apparently by his own hand. Was the attorney's murder a random act of violence or a professional hit? This is just one of the mysteries available for you to solve on Chapter Dark. Do you have the detective skills to solve them all? You can find a link to Chapter Dark in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching today's video. We hope you found it interesting. If you did, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos just like it. But that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.